Very good evening to everyone. Today I'll be presenting a case, Miss H, 17 years old, presented with the complaints of irregular menstrual cycles since 3 years, increased body hair associated with increased body odor, increased weight gain since 1 year. History of presenting illness, she attained menarche at the age of 14 years and had periods once in 2 to 3 months for 3 to 4 days, not associated with excessive bleeding. Associated with excessive growth of body hair, especially over the face and upper chest, which was coarse and thick and dark black in color. Associated with multiple acne over face and back, for which he received oral and local medication with not much improvement. Associated with sedentary lifestyle, increased junk food consumption, and increased screen time aggravated by the pandemic. No history of cold intolerance, lethargy. I have asked for the features of hypothyroidism. No history of abdominal pain or mass or voice change to look for ovarian or adrenal tumors. No galactorrhea, headache, blurring vision to ask for hyperprolactinemia. And no history of easy bruisability to ask for Cushing's. And no history of drug intake like valproate, glucocorticoids, cyclosporin, which can cause a similar picture. And no history of polyuria, polydipsia to ask for type 2 diabetes or snoring, that's obstructive sleep apnea, which is related to obesity. She's second born child to non-consanguineous married couple. She was born at term with a birth weight of 3.15 kg, cried immediately after birth, developmentally normal child, and currently studying grade 12. No similar complaints in mother or elder sister. History of diabetes in both parents and maternal grandmother. History of hypertension, dyslipidemia in maternal grandparents. No history of CAD or early deaths in the family. Her LMP is 27/2021. Examination wise, her vitals are stable. She's normotensive with a blood pressure of 110/70 mmHg. She had hirsutism and modified Ferryman-Gallwey score of 9/36. Acanthosis nigricans was present. No striae, no goiter. Grade 2 acne present. SMA, she was pubertal and no clitoromegaly. Anthropometry wise, weight was 86.5 kg, which comes to the more than 97th percentile. And height was 171.8, which falls on the 97th percentile. Her BMI was 29.2 kg per meter square, which was more than 27th adult equivalent obesity. Waist circumference of 77 centimeter. Here we can see that her BMI is far beyond the 27th adult equivalent obesity, according to the IAP charts. And this is her hirsutism. We can see that it is terminal hair, which is coarse, thick, black in color, and it's in the male pattern. So hirsutism is defined as excessive coarse terminal hairs distributed in a male fashion, and PCOS is the most common cause in adolescents. A small note on the modified Ferryman-Gallwey score. It is a scoring basically for the adults, and it is called modified because previously there were 11 sites instead of the 9 sites as of now. The excluded sites are the forearm and legs. So it basically involves the upper lip and chin and neck, chest, upper abdomen, lower abdomen, arms, thighs, upper back and lower back. The scoring system is from 0 to 4. 0 is no hair, 4 is to the male pattern virile type of hair. And the total score is 36. Anything less than 8 is normal, 8 to 15 is mild, and more than 15 score is moderate to severe. The fallacies or limitations with Ferryman-Gallwey score is, as I already told, it's for the adults. It was primarily prepared for the adults. And the second thing is it depends on the ethnicity. Like in the Northeast, they may not have a score higher, but they might have a hyperandrogenism. This is because of the low sensitivity of the pilosebaceous unit. Or in people with like North Indian Punjabi community, if I have to name, they might have a higher score with lesser hyperandrogenism. So it has to taken with the caution. And sometimes, like in our case, the score might be just 9/36, but it is definitely troublesome and worrisome to our patient. Coming to the differential diagnosis at the end of history and examination, though I have kept the first diagnosis as obesity with PCOS, I would definitely like to rule out other conditions as PCOS is a diagnosis of exclusion. So the next common differential diagnosis I would like to keep is non-classical CH. It definitely has a similar PCOS-like picture with hyperandrogenism like hirsutism, acne, irregular menstrual cycles. The differentiating features are it might have premature adrenarche in a child before puberty. Then the patient may not be obese as in case of PCOS. More of insulin resistance is there in PCOS. and clitoromegaly might be there, change of voice might be there, and child might be muscular. These all features are against, which is not there in our case. Hypothyroidism, as I already told, the clinical features are not suggestive. She doesn't have a goiter, or she doesn't have dry skin, and no history of lethargy, constipation. And hypothyroidism is known to cause a similar picture of like PCOS, because it decreases SHBG and free testosterone increases. Hyperprolactinemia, there is no galactoria, and there's no history of drugs which causes hyperprolactinemia, like antidepressants, antipsychotics, etc. Androgen secreting ovarian or adrenal tumor also causes a similar picture, but the hirsutism onset and progress is faster, unlike in our case, which was gradual in onset. And other thing is, mass was not felt on per abdominal examination, and definitely there can be a change of voice and increased hirsutism. And glucocorticoid excess or Cushing disease is not considered in our case, because the height of the patient is not short, and there was no striae and no increased frequency of infections. So I have kept it lower down. And if there is menstrual irregularity alone, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is unlikely in our case because child is quite obese. So I would like to keep obesity with PCOS, but with the pinch that I would like to investigate for the other differential diagnosis as well. Coming to the investigations of my patient, ATM cortisol was 10, which is normal. It rules out exogenous Cushing syndrome if any drug intake is there, and thyroid profile is normal. Estrogen was normal. Testosterone was 70.49. This was a total testosterone. More than 55 is considered as PCOS, done by radioimmunoassay. And if it's done through LCMS, more than 42 is considered as abnormal. And we should always remember that if it's more than 200, we should keep our mind open to see for any androgen secreting tumors. Diaz was normal 190. If it's more than 700, then again we should think of adrenal tumors. LH to FSH ratio was 2:1. It is not a diagnostic criteria, but generally it supports to our diagnosis of PCOS. And further, I had done investigations to look for the complication of obesity. Definitely her OMIR was 8.7, and I think about 2.9 is considered as severe insulin resistance. So our patient had insulin resistance. 17 OHP was 0.4, which was normal. Anything less than 2 is normal. 2 to 10, we'll have to go ahead with the synaptin stimulation test, and more than 10 is a feature of non-classic CH. HbA1c was normal, calcium profile was normal, and LFT and lipid profile were fairly normal, and creatinine was normal. So USG abdomen and pelvis showed that there was hepatomegaly with fatty changes. Ovary volume was not more than 12, but generally I would like to tell that PCO morphology in adolescent is not taken as a criteria to diagnose PCOS. Coming to menstrual irregularities, a small note. Irregular menses should not be used as only criterion for PCOS in adolescents, because menstrual irregularities are typical for at least 2 years after menarche. What is irregular menstrual cycle? Less than 1 year post menarche, irregular menstrual cycles are normal pubertal transition. Even less than at least 4 periods in a year is also considered as normal. More than 1 to less than 3 years, less than 21 days or more than 45 days, or less than 6 cycles is considered abnormal. More than 3 years post menarche, less than 21 days or more than 35 days or less than 8 cycles per year is considered abnormal. Secondary amenorrhea is more than 90 days for any one cycle. Primary amenorrhea by the age of 15 years or more than 3 years post-menarche is considered abnormal. We'll be falsely diagnosing 30 to 40% of the patients in adolescents. An enlarged ovarian volume of 12 ml is still suggestive. Treatment or lifestyle modifications are very much important for PCOD. Weight loss and increased physical activity will decrease testosterone levels and increase the SHBG concentration and normalizes the menstrual regularity. And especially, it doesn't have any side effect. Studies show that even 5% reduction in weight helps to regularize the menstrual cycle irregularities. OCPs, how does it work? It is a combination of estrogen component, typically ethinyl estradiol. Progestin component also is there, and third and fourth generation progestins have got anti-androgenic properties like cyproterone acetate and drospirenone, but they have got increased risk of venothromboembolism. Mechanism of action is estrogen raises SHBG, so there will be decrease in the free testosterone. And progestin component will reduce the LH levels and androgen levels, reduces endometrial proliferation, and improvement in acne and hirsutism. Pharmaceuticals. The only insulin sensitizer which has been evaluated in a double-blind RCT is metformin. It's beneficial in PCOS adolescents who were mostly overweight or obese or non-obese with hyperinsulinemia. So the mechanism is it improves the insulin sensitivity in muscle and adipose tissue, and it helps in downregulation of hepatic gluconeogenesis, increases GLP-1 secretion and GLP-1 receptor expression. So postprandial glucose will be reduced, and decrease of ovarian and adrenal androgen production. Dosage is 850 to 1 gram per day. Side effects include gastrointestinal discomfort and lactic acidosis. Coming to anti-androgens, whenever there's no improvement after giving OC pills for 6 months, we can think of anti-androgens for hirsutism or other hyperandrogenic symptoms. So there are generally 3 types. The androgen receptor blockers. Spironolactone generally competes with dihydrotestosterone, and it's most commonly used. The dosage is 25 mg per day to 200 mg per day. And transient menstrual irregularities, breast tenderness, fatigue are the side effects, and rarely orthostasis. Flutamide is potentially hepatotoxic. Its dosage is 1 mg per kg per day, and it's safe. Third generation progestin, cyproterone acetate, given combined with OCP. Side effect is liver toxicity. 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, which will inhibit the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. The active form is finasteride. Side effect is feminization of male fetuses. Whenever we are using finasteride, it's always better to use with the oral contraceptive pill. Coming to local therapies or cosmetics, photoepilation is suggested as a first-line management of localized hirsutism in PCOS. Diode and alexandrite lasers can be tried. Topical eflornithine, which were used as a adjuvant to photoepilation in laser-resistant facial hirsutism. So coming to polycystic ovarian syndrome, it is defined by a combination of signs and symptoms of androgen excess and ovarian dysfunction in the absence of other diagnoses. It was first described by Steen and Leventhal in 1935. Salient features are complex heterogeneous family disorder, hyperandrogenism, and chronic anovulation. Pathophysiology, I'll just take 2 minutes on this busy slide. Basically, what we knew is impaired glucose tolerance and ovarian steroidogenesis impairment led to the increased LH. But definitely there are other factors like neuroendocrine factors which will lead to perturbation of the Kn-Levy neurons and which will lead to increased LH. There might be genetic condition like ethylation defect of the LHCGR receptor or microRNA mRNA defect. All these and environmental factors together contribute to the increased LH and increased androgens, which will lead to the 2 things, that is hyperandrogenism and ovarian dysfunction. Coming to the diagnostic criteria, we should very well note that there are only 2 criteria. That's irregular menses or oligomenorrhea and evidence of hyperandrogenism, that's biochemical, clinical, example progressive hirsutism. Optional is PCOM, severe cystic acne. Not recommended are obesity. Obesity is there only in 50% of the condition. Insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, biomarkers, example AMH, testosterone to dihydrotestosterone ratio, acanthosis nigricans is not recommended. And comments are must generally be 2 years post-menarche, must rule out other disorders of hyperandrogenism, example non-classic CAH and Cushing's syndrome. And obesity will by itself complicate the PCO morphology. Obesity alone is associated with insulin resistance and compensatory hyperinsulinemia, may exacerbate pubertal insulin resistance. Accumulation of lipid like diacylglycerols and ceramides in muscles interfere with insulin signaling. So here we can see in PCOS, LH excess will lead to functional ovarian hyperandrogenism causing hirsutism, and in granulosa cell there is sex steroid excess, anovulation, PCOM, and insulin resistant hyperinsulinism aggravates the androgen production. So coming to the summary, diagnosing PCOS during adolescence is challenging because features of normal pubertal development like irregular menstrual cycles or polycystic ovarian morphology overlap with the adult diagnostic criteria, but which may be normal in adolescents. The diagnosis of PCOS in adolescents currently hinges on evidence of ovulatory dysfunction and androgen excess. Treatment helps in decreasing future comorbidities. The treatment options for PCOS should be individualized based on each presentation of needs and preferences of each patient. Clinicians should be aware that PCOS is associated with significant metabolic and psychological comorbidities and screen appropriately, especially for at-risk PCOS. What is at-risk PCOS? Is 3 years post-menarche in relation to menstrual irregularities and 8 years post-menarche in relation to the use of pelvic ultrasound to identify PCOM. So coming to the diagnosis of our case, the features positive in our case is obesity, insulin resistance, hirsutism with a Ferriman-Gallwey of 9/36, acne, and oligomenorrhea. And pelvic ultrasound should not be used for the diagnosis in children with gynecological age of less than 8 years, that is less than 8 years post-menarche, to high incidence of multifollicular ovaries in the life stage, because at this stage there will be multifollicular ovaries present. Hence,
Shantala, do you want to now tell what treatment you advise, because we have a lot of questions, and then
sure,
yeah, so just in 1 second, just tell what treatment you had advised. That slide you missed actually. Yeah,
sure ma'am. We had started the child on lifestyle modifications, and for our insulin resistance with obesity, we had started on tablet metformin 500 mg per day initially, and gradually increased to tablet metformin 500 mg BD and oral contraceptive pills. And if she doesn't respond well, we might start on anti-androgens as well, and dermatological management for hirsutism.
Yeah. Thank you, Shantala. You really explained your case, as well as you explained how you approach the patient and discuss the differential diagnosis and the important points we should remember in diagnosis of polycystic ovary syndrome in adolescents. Now, there are a couple of questions which I would ask you if you could answer. One is, what is the first line medication in polycystic ovary syndrome? How do you decide whether to give metformin or OCPs? Would you like to comment on that? You showed it in your slide, but if you could just repeat it once again.
First thing is lifestyle modification. And secondly, when it comes to medication, pharmaceuticals, OC pills are the first line. Metformin we add whenever there is obesity with insulin resistance, or even lean patients with insulin resistance. So OC pills are the first line.
Yes. So metformin and OCP have a different role, isn't it? OCP you gave for
regularizing the
regularization of menstrual cycles, as well as if there's a mild hirsutism. Yeah. So you can use OCP, but metformin, where you, as you rightly said, if the patient is obese and if the patient has IGT, like your patient, her blood sugar 2 hour post meal was 172 or something. So she has impaired glucose tolerance, very likelihood that if she remains obese, she may go on to develop overt diabetes. So in both these situations, you can give a trial of metformin and see. Although metformin is not very helpful in hirsutism and rarely helps in regularization of cycles. So they have a different role to play. Metformin and OCP have a different role to play. Okay, the other question is, will you start spironolactone if you're giving OCP containing cyproterone? So
cyproterone itself has anti-androgenic effect, ma'am. So I think it should take care without spironolactone.
Yes, and if in mild hirsutism, as you rightly said earlier, that your first line of treatment would be an OCP. But if the girl has moderate to severe hirsutism, the oral contraceptive pill, combined oral contraceptive pill, even with cyproterone, may not work because the kind of doses of cyproterone available, the preparations available, they have just 2 milligram of cyproterone, which is not a very good anti-androgen. What you need is about 35 milligrams or something. And so that's not a good anti-androgen. In such situations, you have to use strong anti-androgens like spironolactone and others. The other thing which we need to remember is when we start a patient on spironolactone, they are likely to have menorrhagia and irregular cycles. So even with spironolactone, we should combine it with OCP. And the other thing is that if the girl is sexually active, we will not know. So all anti-androgens, we should be cautious and advise the girls not to get pregnant, and to avoid that, use of OCP helps because it will act as a contraceptive pill. Yeah. So that thing we really have to remember. How useful, another question is, how useful is androgen index? Any thoughts about that?
Ferryman-Galloway score, ma'am?
No, androgen index. I think the question asked was meant for was free androgen index. Again,
free testosterone.
yeah. So, yes. So do you want to take that question of free androgen index?
I will try, ma'am. Actually, it is a calculation, total testosterone into free testosterone, and it's done by dialysis method. Or SHBG
yes,
can be calculated.
It is total testosterone upon the SHBG concentration into 100. But again, you need to have normative data, and there's no normative data for free androgen index. So you can't use it. We developed our own normative data for total testosterone and free androgen index. But as Shantala said, that there may be differences even in our ethnicity. Northeast versus the Northwest would be totally different from the southern part of India. So we really need to have normative data for free androgen index, which is not available in our country. So it's not very useful to diagnose hyperandrogenism. The other question is, patients are always apprehensive to start OCPs. Any other option? How long will you give OCPs and metformin?
Metformin, we can repeat OGTT after a few months to see if insulin resistance has improved, ma'am. Then we can stop metformin once the insulin resistance has improved.
Or if the girl has shown weight loss and other things, like your lifestyle is working,
yes,
do you think you can stop it?
We can stop it, ma'am. If her insulin resistance has decreased and her weight has decreased, her symptoms have improved, we can stop metformin according to the...
Yeah, if you're using OCPs for regular cycle, for regularization of cycles, what will your advice be? The question is, how long will you give OCPs and metformin? So metformin, you did say that if the girl loses weight and diet and lifestyle, her sugars are maintained, she doesn't have insulin, hyperinsulinemia, or as you are calculating HOMA-IR, then you may think of stopping the metformin. But if all the metabolic parameters like impaired glucose tolerance does remain, then you will have to continue metformin. And if the child, if the girl hasn't lost weight and you think she has insulin resistant, you can continue metformin. For OCPs, for regularization of cycles, you will have to give and maybe stop in between and see if the girl has spontaneous regular cycles, you may not want to continue. But for hirsutism, there's no fixed time that for how long you have to give treatment, because once you stop the therapy, again after 6 months, normally a hair follicle has a lifespan of 3 to 6 months. So again, after 6 months of stopping the therapy, the hirsutism may come back. So generally on a minimal dose of anti-androgens, if the hirsutism is controlled, we continue treatment for a very long time. I think Selma is with us, and if she has some more comments, because she's quite an expert on this. So if she has any other comments, as soon as we finish, we will pass on this question to her to give her opinion about how long to continue anti-androgens and OCPs. This question bugs all of us all the time. So the other question is, even if in idiopathic hirsutism, will you start OCPs if no menstrual issues, drug of choice?
No, ma'am, we don't start for idiopathic hirsutism, ma'am. In some condition, even if there is no hyperandrogenism, there can be hirsutism. That is, but obesity, if it is contributing to the hirsutism, probably lifestyle modification can help them.
Okay, but if it is moderate to severe, you would have to give anti-androgens. Okay. And then, as I said earlier, you will have to combine it with OCP, because generally it leads to menorrhagia, irregular menstrual cycles. Spironolactone is the drug which has been most commonly used for adolescents and young adults. flutamide and finasteride is not so commonly used. Although I use finasteride quite often, I have not used flutamide, so I don't have a lot of experience with flutamide. Flutamide is used a lot by the Spanish group. I don't think it's used in the US as well. Although low-dose flutamide is safe according to whatever Spanish data we have from Lourdes group, but I don't use it, and nor do I have seen a lot of people using it, even in adults, flutamide. So finasteride is relatively safe compared to flutamide. So that you can use, but as it is an anti-androgen, and we said that if the girl becomes pregnant, then the male fetus will have effects of the anti-androgenic drugs in virilization. So generally an oral contraceptive is advised along with that.
Dr. Preeti, if you want to take,
Yes.
we can get 2 more questions and then
Okay,
Dr.
fine.
comment if there is any, and then
Okay. So the other question was, what will be the minimal investigation for a PCOS child? I think Shantala, you answered that you have to rule out other causes, as well as you have to evaluate the child for comorbidities, which you highlighted very nicely. Then the next, I saw a question about AMH. I would like to very clearly say that AMH up till now has no role for diagnosis of PCO. What to talk of adolescents, even in adults, it is still not accepted as a surrogate biomarker for diagnosis. So we should not go on the basis of AMH. I think there are lots of questions. Shantala, if you would like to answer them in the chat box, it will help. And I would ask that question to Selma, that how long do you continue metformin and OCPs in a girl with polycystic ovary syndrome? We'd like to hear from you on that.
First, I'd like to thank Shantala for an absolutely amazing presentation. It was wonderful. And she even had some of my artwork there. So thank you so much. But I think it's a difficult question because PCOS is a chronic disorder and lifestyle intervention and weight loss is the most important thing. And if the young lady loses weight, then decreasing the dose of metformin and stopping that becomes reasonable. With oral contraceptives, again, these are young adult women, at least in the United States, they're going off to college. It's sometimes preferable to leave them on the oral contraceptives for several years until they're ready to start their families. For the birth control uses as well as treating the PCOS, because once one stops the therapy, if there's not been sufficient weight loss, generally the symptoms recur. So I think it's a very individualized discussion with a large focus on lifestyle intervention.